I've always been used because I'm a good guy. And women, when they meet me, they say, I can use this son of a bitch. I can push him around. He's an easygoing guy. So I do it. But finally I get to resent it a bit.
What do you resent?
Just being pushed.
Pushed?
Yeah.
Watching the same stuff on TV, and nothing will really upset you. Just knock down the social norms, and the rest follows suit. It's quite easy until there's nothing left holding up the roof. Basically, all the pillars are knocked down. That's the technique of totally wiping out all that was to bring in the new, and the new is what your masters have designed for you to believe in. And unfortunately, it works awfully well. Most folk accept it, thinking it's all quite natural. Now, as I was saying before too, when they show you anything to do with supposedly music and almost nude dancing or simulating sex on stage in a music video with all kinds of things, there's definitely intention behind it all to just destroy all that was to bring in the new, as I say, and to get people to emulate it all. And a lot of children will actually try all these different things that they see and end up in an awful mess. But it's no coincidence, as I say, it's always pushed through sex. A very strong instinct is sex. It's something that you can certainly control it. And at one time, societies pretty well did control it to an extent. Everyone was taught to do so. Otherwise, you paid the consequences of literally your actions. It made you think twice about what you're going to do, and with whom, for sure, because it often meant marriage and families. That's the reason for it. That way, you didn't need a welfare state to take care of children or abortions, because the children were welcome, and it was quite natural to have children. But not today, of course. Your masters don't want you to have children anymore. And specific groups are targeted for having no children at all, more so than other groups, as you well. Just look around you. It's obvious, isn't it? And that's the whole message of the darn thing, For goodness sake. When you start to enjoy this kind of stuff, then life is already becoming cheap. And that's the intention of it too. But it's also that nothing's normal, or everything that can be done is normal. Actually, that's probably the true message. Anything that can be done is therefore normal. And since that's a lie, then society further suffers of disintegration, social disintegration. Of course it is. You're under a warfare, an incredibly powerful warfare. Not by chance. It's well directed. They have lots of think tanks working on this kind of thing all the time, with psychologists, neuroscientists, behaviorists, and so on. And they've been there your whole life. They were there before I was born, these ongoing groups, because it's essential that your mind and your culture is not only controlled, but altered, completely altered, but totally dominated. Now, I've mentioned Lord Bertrand Russell many times because he's so important. He and many others working together in the Frankfurt School. He worked with the Frankfurt School. And he worked with the Macy Group. They all worked together with other think tanks too, working with them. And they were given literally the authority by the US president after World War II to create a new culture to dominate and control society in the West. So they used it in Britain, they used it everywhere else too. And it's still ongoing. It's been awfully successful until the culture that was is pretty well eradicated, completely eradicated. All the old social norms are pretty well gone, demolished. Anybody who still held on to those beliefs now and ways of behaving are probably put under some kind of mental illness today by the modern manipulators of so-called science of psychology. But Russell himself helped to shape, as I say, with the Frankfurt School and so on, the culture, and how the culture would be changed over time, right down to abortion, right down to destruction of the family, until everyone's just single and having lots of sex and so on. But he also worked on techniques to do with psychology. That was his particular kind of field, psychology and so on. But he lit things out the bag in the 1950s when he wrote The Impact of Science on Society. He says, physiology and psychology, he says, afford fields for scientific technique which still await development. Two great men, and he mentions Pavlov and Freud. Now, Pavlov was the scientist in the Soviet system, the early Soviet system, who helped change the society there for this, to make the Soviet man and woman the ones who would be little robots and so on. He was a guy who shocked all the dogs. He had a great time just creating incredible pain to animals, and in order to find out how to use it all in people. Anyway, this is what Russell said. Two great men, Pavlov and Freud. Now, Freud was a con man too, who was anything but virtuous, even with his own patients. He was quite something else. But anyway, it says they've laid the foundation for this new physiology and psychology. I do not accept the view that they are in any essential conflict, but what structure will be built on their foundations is still in doubt. I think the subject, which will be of the most importance politically, is mass psychology. Now, this is what they were using. I mean, when they say they were thinking of doing things, they were already doing it. This is how they write their books. It says its importance has been enormously increased by the growth of modern methods of propaganda. Of these, the most influential is what is called education. Now, this guy worked with all the groups that worked with the United Nations to create a new culture. Right? Education is propaganda. Religion plays a part, though a diminishing one. The press, the cinema, and the radio play an increasing part. Entertainment and so on. It may be hoped that in time anybody will be able to persuade anybody of anything if he can catch the patient young and is provided by the state with money and equipment. And it's true, you've got characters in front of your face today that tell you what you better believe about them and so on. Russell continued, the subject will make great strides when it's taken up by the scientists under a scientific dictatorship. The social psychologists of the future will have a number of classes of school children in whom they will try different methods of producing an unshakable conviction that snow is black. Now, he's just using that as an example. In other words, you just take a group of children and you'll give them a completely different reality than from another group, and you'll test them out together with the other group eventually to see how they then try and communicate with their beliefs to each other. Anyway, so various results will soon be arrived at. First of all, that the influence of home is obstructive. That is, do straight away with the family unit. Second, that not much can be done unless indoctrination begins before the age of 10. Third, that verses set to music and repeatedly intoned are very effective, and that's why during the 60s you had so many songs. The Beatles were prime of that, where at the end of the song they could go on for 3 or 4 minutes just repeating one line over and over and over again. Fourth, that the opinion that snow is white must be held to show a morbid taste for eccentricity. But I anticipate it's for the future scientists to make these maxims precise and discover exactly how much it costs per head, so economics at the end factor in, to make children believe that snow is black, and how much less it would cost them to believe it is dark grey. In other words, whatever the state decides they'll be taught to believe, they'll do lots of experiments to test it all out. The techniques, you see, it's the techniques that are important. He concluded with a warning: although the science will be diligently studied, it will be rigidly confined to the governing class. The populace will not be allowed to know how its convictions were generated. And they aren't. Most folk never question. They've all got lots of opinions, but they never question how they got them. It says every government that has been in charge of education for a generation will be able to control its subjects securely without the need of armies or policemen. And some countries are better at it than others, obviously. I mean, Canada is one of the most docile countries, where they can literally tax and incredibly high levels of taxation. And now we're going into carbon taxes to bring into austerity. And there won't be a murmur from, if it is, they're going to publish it for sure, that's true. But there's hardly a murmur from the people. Which makes you ask, what else is being used on the public here? Yeah. Now, Russell also wrote the Scientific Outlook. He put a whole chapter down to education, done by a scientific society. He talked about different levels of education, one for the ruling elite and one for the ordinary people. So two levels of education. So that the ruling elite, the Charles Galton Darwin types, would be told the real facts of how everything really works and what agendas happen to be true and how they're working and all the rest of it. The ordinary people would be told how just to obey and all that. But the scientific rulers would give a different education for ordinary folk. And ordinary folk would be taught to be docile, he says, industrious, punctual, thoughtless, and contented. So docile, industrious, punctual, thoughtless, and contented. Contentment would be the highest on the list, the most important thing to do. Behaviorism, biochemistry would be brought in to work on the people to make this more definite. So biochemistry, look at what you're eating today and you call it food. And again, do you think it's just for the profit motive that they make things dirt cheap for themselves and they add chemicals instead of leaving the food alone and all? No. It said too in that book, The Scientific Outlook, he said, all the boys and girls will learn from an early age to be what is called cooperative. And that means to do exactly what everybody else is doing. Initiative will be discouraged, and that's what you see in schools now. It's all groupthink, isn't it? If you don't agree with the teacher on something, you're told to stand in the corner until you agree to vote the same way as a whole class on something, or whatever it happens to be. And initiative would be scientifically trained out of them. That's what you said. For the children who would be amongst the ruling class, their education would be basically have one prime thing, which was loyalty to the world states and to their own order as a ruling class. And members of the governing class will be encouraged to be adventurous and full of initiative. It'll be recognized that it's their business to improve scientific technique and to keep the manual workers contented by means of continual new amusements. So realize that Hollywood isn't just a bunch of independent people, and no, this is a particular class. And every country's got its own version of it, Hollywood too. And they'll use your tax money, by the way, to indoctrinate you. Under grants and art grants and God knows what else. And there was one exception to all of this. And he says, on those rare occasions when a boy or girl who has passed the age at which it's usual to determine social status shows such marked ability as to seem the intellectual equal of the rulers. In other words, someone from the lower caste or class or whatever has the ability to understand things and has a high enough intellect. A difficult situation will arise requiring serious consideration. If the youth is content to abandon his previous associates, that means family and everything and friends, and to throw in his lot wholeheartedly with the rulers, he may, after a suitable test, be promoted. But if he shows any regrettable solidarity with his previous associates, the rulers will reluctantly conclude that there's nothing to be done with him except to send him to the lethal chamber before his ill-disciplined intelligence has time to spread revolt. This will be a painful duty to the rulers, but I think they will not shrink from performing it. This guy is hailed as some great philosopher. And no one asks why. Well, Why? Ask as much as long as you ask why he's got this kind of fame, or is even infamous. And why was he working with all these top groups, hatching and working on the new indoctrination processes? That you're still living through them yet. What they designed in the 50s, 60s, and 70s hasn't all been fulfilled yet. They're still going through different phases of it. But you think about that. Everything he talked about in the 50s, or even in 1931, in fact, education as scientific society, that was the scientific outlook. You think about that. Has it all been pretty well done? All of that we just read here, pretty well been done, isn't it? They're using genetics now to go through your family histories. You're helping them too with the internet. The internet's a fantastic tool that they gave you in order to they can get all your data from you that you'll voluntarily put out there. You save them a lot of work. You put through your family medical histories, everything like that, and they can work through it, and they can see that if you're liable to come down with something or not, and how much you're going to cost the system. Therefore, don't treat so-and-so because don't want to live a few more years anyway, so what's the point? I'm not kidding you. Everything's marked out this way today. Your economic value to their society at the top. That's the only reason you're around. And that's the only reason they might help you or they might not help you if you get sick, or what they're going to treat you with. That's how bad it is. And folk have no idea. They think it's all somehow quite normal. Sad, isn't it? That you take everything for granted. It's just, if it's there, it must be normal. Whatever it happens to be. Beginning back again to what you must do in a totalitarian society is obey and see what they tell you better see. Remember Orwell in 1984, as Winston's being tortured, O'Brien says to him, "How many fingers am I holding up?" And when eventually, after many torturing sessions, Winston says, "I'm trying to see whatever it was that he was supposed to see, 3 or 4, whatever it was."
How can I help seeing what's in front of my face? 2 and 2 make 4.
Sometimes they're 5, sometimes 3, or all of them at once. You must try harder.
Fingers. I'm trying to see. I'm really trying to see. And then eventually he sees them and he says, "It's not good enough," Brian says, "that you say what I want to hear you say. You've got to believe it." In other words, your reconditioning would be thorough when you would believe that whatever amount of fingers you put up there were what O'Brien said it was, regardless of how many were actually there. Your whole ability to reason logically will be up in the air according to your masters, and they'll tell you what you better see, and so on. And that's where we are today. That's where we are today, folks. And you know it too, and you know I'm telling the truth. That's what you're supposed to see. Or else. So when your own government mandates that you see 3 fingers or whatever it happens to be, you're in trouble. You really are, because it doesn't stop there. It really doesn't. Or what's better than a good juicy steak or a stale piece of bread? Or else, into isolation room until you're drooling for that stale piece of bread. That's where we are. That's really where we are. And they're not finished yet.